There's a strange kind of magic that happens in storytelling when the person we're told to root against starts making more sense than the hero. The anti-villain is that magic trick in motion. They're not the caricature of evil who ties victims to railroad tracks. They have a cause, one that might even be noble, but their methods take us to dangerous territory. They're the kind of character who makes you shift uncomfortably in your seat because deep down you agree with them, just not in the way they're going about it. In modern cinema, no one has embodied this better than Black Panther's Eric Killmonger. His dream is compelling, but his plan is to do it by flooding oppressed communities with Wakanda's advanced weaponry, beginning a worldwide revolution. Philosophers call this the dirty hands dilemma, when you believe you must commit moral wrongs to achieve moral rights. Killmonger's tragedy is that his chosen method mirrors the very violence he's trying to end, forcing us to ask the uncomfortable question: if you fight monsters with their own weapons, do you become one yourself? From a storytelling perspective, anti-villains work best as mirrors. They're the hero's reflection in a darkened glass, and the version they might become if they made different choices. In Black Panther, T'Challa starts as a cautious isolationist king, guarding Wakanda's secrets above all else. Meanwhile, Killmonger is his ideological opposite: bold, interventionist, impatient with gradualism. This makes him the perfect opponent because he wants to drag the hero into a moral battle they can't ignore. What's brilliant about Killmonger is that he loses the fight, but wins the argument. By the end of the movie, T'Challa opens Wakanda to the world, finding a middle ground between isolation and violent revolution. The shadow of Killmonger's worldview ended up shaping the hero's choices. That's the anti-villain's secret power. Even in defeat, they leave the story changed in their image. Part of why audiences connect with someone like Killmonger is psychological. His backstory is a masterclass in empathy triggers. As a boy, he witnessed his father, N'Jobu, a Wakandan, being killed, felt abandoned by Wakanda. This fuels his desire to avenge his father's death and to use Wakanda's advanced technology to empower oppressed people of African descent globally. He grows up in a system stacked against him because his upbringing in Oakland, California exposed him to the harsh realities of systemic racism and poverty, further solidifying his belief in the need for radical change. And all the while, he knows Wakanda is a place with the power to help, but they let him and millions of others suffer. You see, when we understand a character's pain this deeply, our moral defenses soften. We don't see just a villain, we see a human being whose rage has roots. That empathy speaks in his final scene. His dying words, which were revealed when he asked to be buried in the ocean with his enslaved ancestors, don't sound like a villain's monologue at all. They're the voice of someone who has carried the weight of history, who has chosen death over subjugation. That moment reframes the entire conflict as a fight for dignity, and it stays in the mind long after the credits roll. The danger of characters like this is that they make us question our own moral lines. In real life, we can't comfortably cheer for violence without grappling with its real consequences, but in fiction, we can explore those what-if scenarios safely. Writers use this space to challenge us. Would we choose safety over justice? Can violence ever be truly moral if it ends greater violence? Killmonger doesn't just provide these questions for T'Challa, he provides them for us. Villains come in many shades, from the chaotic destroyer who wants harm for harm's sake, to the selfish opportunist who just wants personal gain. Killmonger sits in a rarer category as a figure whose cause is worth fighting for, whose pain is real, whose tactics corrode the very justice he seeks. This gray zone is why he feels more human than the shining hero. In essence, heroes embody who we want to be. Anti-villains embody who we might become if the world cut us deep enough. It's not just the justice they promise, it's the decisiveness. In stories, heroes often hesitate, wrestling with the morality of their choices, known as the anti-villain's act. They move swiftly, decisively, without waiting for permission. For audiences living in a world where injustice feels endless and change feels slow, that decisiveness is intoxicating, even if we know it's dangerous. The most compelling thing about Killmonger is that he still manages to win after losing. T'Challa adopts part of his vision, opening Wakanda to the outside world. This kind of dark victory is deeply satisfying because it acknowledges that the antagonist wasn't entirely wrong. It respects their perspective and lets their ideas outlive them, just as movements in real history often outlast their leaders. In that final scene, when Killmonger refuses to be saved, it isn't just a goodbye, it's a passing of the torch to someone who might carry the cause without burning the world down in the process. Killmonger shows us the pain of someone who turns to violence because he believes it's the only way to create justice. However, here is someone who takes that same idea to a much larger scale as a Holocaust survivor who has seen what hatred can do. Magneto is not the cackling, world-dominating tyrant that comic books are often accused of producing. He's a survivor and a child who lived through the Holocaust and saw firsthand the machinery of hatred. That past isn't a happy backstory, it's the foundation of his entire philosophy. Every decision he makes, every act of aggression, is built on the bedrock of never again. From an ethical philosophy standpoint, Magneto lives in the dark space between effective necessity and the survivalist ethic. He believes mutant kind is perpetually on the edge of genocide, and history has taught him that waiting for goodwill or understanding is a fool's game. His worldview is simple: and terrifying in its clarity. If the world will inevitably try to destroy mutants, then mutants must be strong enough to strike first. This is where the moral issue comes in. Magneto's goal for the survival and safety of his people is undeniably just, but his methods are also preemptive, often violent, sometimes indiscriminate. He's willing to sacrifice lives, even innocent ones, if it means tipping the balance of power in mutants' favor. This is the dirty hands problem again. Doing something morally wrong for what you believe in is a greater moral fight. The question becomes whether you can preserve the soul of your cause while wading through blood to protect it. However, Magneto functions as the perfect counterweight to Charles Xavier. Xavier represents hope, diplomacy, and coexistence. Magneto represents pragmatism, self-reliance, and the belief that peace will always be temporary. This is the perfect opponent principle in action. The best antagonists are not random obstacles, but ideological obstruction. Magneto forces Xavier, and by extension the audience, to confront the uncomfortable truth that his fears are not baseless paranoia. Every time humanity reacts to mutants with fear and violence, Magneto's worldview is validated. In some stories, he's even proven right mid-plot, when mutant kind is targeted by governments, hunted by sentinels, or rounded up for registration. This is what makes him so compelling. He doesn't exist to be disproved. He exists to be answered. Psychologically, Magneto is engineered for empathy. His trauma is historically rooted, and we recognize it in the real world. Audiences are not asked to imagine some vague fictional suffering. We know exactly what shaped him. As a Holocaust survivor, his mistrust of humanity isn't just understandable, it's painfully logical. This backstory creates a deep emotional hook. We may disagree with his actions, but we cannot dismiss his reasoning. And when we see the oppression mutants face in the X-Men world, the discrimination, the fear, the calls for control and eradication, his reaction starts to feel less like extremism and more like a tragic inevitability. Here's where audience psychology gets interesting. We're more likely to sympathize with a character whose choices we might make under similar circumstances. If we lived through what Magneto lived through, if we had the power to prevent it from happening again, could we truly say we would take the high road every time? However, the danger and brilliance of Magneto is that he often wins even when he loses. He might be defeated in battle, but his arguments remain lodged in our minds. His very presence forces the X-Men to acknowledge that peaceful coexistence is not a guaranteed outcome. It's a fragile, constantly threatened choice. More than once, Xavier's actions are shaped or accelerated by the knowledge that Magneto's harsher alternative is always waiting. This is the anti-villain's quiet victory. They change the hero, force a shift in philosophy, sometimes even lead to the adoption of their ideas in a softened form. Magneto's militant defense of mutants pushes Xavier to be more protective and occasionally more willing to take risks for his people. In terms of the villain spectrum, Magneto lives in the grayest of zones. He's neither the sadistic destroyer who acts out of cruelty, nor the selfish opportunist chasing personal gain. His mission is collective survival. That puts him closer to a tragic hero who simply believes the world will never allow him the luxury of mercy. And this is where the story tightens the screws. The audience knows that his worst fears are not unfounded, yet we hope he's wrong, because if he's right, then Xavier's dream collapses. The tragic irony is that the cycle he fights to escape is one he helps perpetuate. This is why he's so rich as a character. He's both a victim and an enabler. Meanwhile, there's a special thrill in fiction when the person you are supposed to root against walks into the story, and instead of bracing for their downfall, you feel yourself quietly hoping they make it out on top. This is the seductive power of the anti-villain. In Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, that figure is Namor, ruler of the underwater kingdom Talokan. He is a king, a protector, and in his own mind, a necessary evil. And while the movie casts him as the antagonist, he's the sort who makes you wonder, was he wrong? Or was he just too dangerous to agree with? Just like most anti-heroes, Namor's people are survivors of colonial conquest, descendants of a civilization driven to the edge by greed and brutality. They chose a radical escape, to retreat beneath the sea, building a thriving world away from the surface. Namor's entire identity is anchored in protecting that sanctuary, and his fear of exposure has passed down through generations. From an ethical standpoint, Namor operates firmly in the realm of communitarian ethics, with the idea that moral duty is defined by loyalty to one's own people and culture. His primary obligation is to Talokan, not to some abstract universal morality. This is why he's willing to commit brutal acts now if it means guaranteeing the long-term survival of his kingdom. Namor's goal is to safeguard his people from the same fate as their ancestors, and his ideas lean toward preemptive destruction. In the movie, when the world edges too close to discovering Talokan, Namor doesn't just seek to hide. He seeks to form an alliance with Wakanda to launch an aggressive war on the surface world. This is a strike meant to keep potential enemies afraid to act. Just like other anti-heroes, he believes you must commit moral wrongs to prevent a greater catastrophe. The danger, of course, is that fear-based security comes at a cost. The more you rule through intimidation, the more you risk becoming the very oppressor you want to resist. In Wakanda Forever, Shuri is a young leader learning what it means to protect her people after devastating personal loss. She begins with a guarded stance, focused inward, still grieving. Namor enters as her ideological challenger, offering a path of decisive, ruthless protectionism. He's what Shuri could become if she allowed grief and fear to fully define her rule. This mirror structure is essential. Namor forces Shuri to confront the limits limits of isolation and the temptation of preemptive violence. The beauty of the anti-villain is that they don't just push the plot, they push the protagonist into a moral test. By the end, Shuri chooses a different path, but Namor's voice continues. Shuri's struggle with Namor shows the pull between protecting your own people and preserving a moral line you can live with. Then there's Thanos, an anti-hero who takes that same dilemma and scales it to the entire universe, convinced that survival demands the unthinkable. Thanos' backstory in Infinity War is deceptively simple. He's a survivor of Titan, a once thriving planet that fell because its people refused to confront overpopulation and dwindling resources. He proposed a solution of the random elimination of half the population, fair and impartial, but was dismissed as a madman. An effective solution collapsed, just as he predicted. That experience forged an unshakable conviction: unchecked life will always consume itself. And so, armed with the Infinity Stones, he sets out to prevent what he sees as inevitable universal collapse by erasing half of all living beings, instantly and without prejudice. Thanos has the belief that the morality of an action depends solely on its consequences. His aim is to maximize the survival potential of the universe's remaining life, even if achieving that outcome demands an act of high cruelty. The problem, of course, is that efficient solutions taken to its extremes can justify almost anything, including genocide, oppression, you name it, as long as the end result is deemed better. Meanwhile, Thanos is a masterstroke of the villain as the protagonist approaches. In Infinity War, the film belongs to him as much as, if not more than, the Avengers. The story tracks his journey, his obstacles, his sacrifices, and his eventual triumph. Structurally, the heroes are not protective agents, but reactive defenders. They spend the movie trying to stop Thanos, while he moves steadily forward with clear intention. This narrative inversion flips audience expectations. We are conditioned to watch a hero's quest toward victory. Here, we watch a villain's quest toward what he considers salvation. By the time the movie ends with the infamous snap, the moment lands with the hero reaching his goal, except we are horrified by the cost. Despite the general idea about Thanos, he's actually built for reluctant sympathy. He doesn't relish killing. He doesn't posture as a sadist. In one of his most telling moments, he comforts a young Gamora and speaks to her softly, almost tenderly, even as he murders half her people. This contradiction creates cognitive dissonance. How can someone so gentle in one context be so monstrous in another? The emotional centerpiece of his arc is the sacrifice of Gamora. For all his talk of balance and duty, this is the moment that makes him human and horrifying. He doesn't sidestep the personal cost of his mission, he embraces it. In his mind, the depth of his loss proves the purity of his cause. This takes us to his belief that one's willingness to suffer for a cause validates its righteousness. For the audience, it's disorienting because we recognize that his grief is real, and yet it's born from an act that's unforgivable. Thanos' success is another element that makes him a legendary anti-villain. Too often, villains are defeated in the final act, allowing audiences to leave the theater comforted by the restoration of order. Infinity War denies us that comfort. Thanos wins. His snap reshapes the universe, and the movie closes not on the heroes regrouping for another fight, but on the villain quietly watching the sunrise, satisfied. That victory forces us to grab his ideology instead of brushing it aside. If he had failed, we could dismiss his argument as wrong by virtue or its defeat. But because he succeeds, we start to think, did the universe in some way benefit from his actions? The next movie may answer no, but in the self-contained arc of Infinity War, the doubt continues. There's also a strange honesty to Thanos' approach. Many real-world leaders would disguise such an agenda in rhetoric about temporary measures or necessary evils. Thanos does not lie. He tells people exactly what he intends to do and why, and he doesn't change. This unstable conviction can be intoxicating for audiences living in a world where leadership often feels indecisive or self-serving. In fiction, decisiveness, even in a villain, can look like strength, and here lies the paradox. The very decisiveness that makes Thanos appealing is also what makes him dangerous. His absolute certainty leaves no room for compromise, no possibility of persuasion. Once he deems his plan the only way forward, all dissent becomes irrelevant. In the end, Thanos in Infinity War is not the villain we boo from the dark. He's the antagonist we follow to the end of his journey. That's why, when the screen fades to black and half the universe is gone, the most unsettling feeling isn't despair for the heroes, it's the quiet thought that maybe, just maybe, the Mad Titan had a point.